Sveiki, draugai. Monika suorganizavo laivą laive. Žodžiu, dabar darysime laivą laive. Žodžiu, va, į tokį laivelį mus čia įsodina. Į tokį laivelį. Ir gal aš persuksiu priekinę.
Sakė nevakcinuotėms be maskių. Nevakcinuotėms be maskių.
Jo. Ne, nu, mes labai neklausom iš tikrųjų dėl tų maskų, tai čia yra absurdas visur, kur bekeliauja. Mes nekreipiam dėmesį ir nieks prie mūsų nesikabina, nes matyt jau yra pavargę žmonės nuo tų visų, žinai, intelektualų žmonės iš karto siunčia ant 3 raidžių visus tos tokius aiškintojus, supranti, kvaili paklūsta, nu ir visi rado savo vietą, reiškiasi, kvaili nešioja tas kaukės, supranti, intelektualus gyvena savo gyvenimą ir, žodžiu, taip nusistovėjo normali sistema pagaliau. Dabar iš tikrųjų darbo atranka labai gera turėtų būti. Gatvėje gali eiti iš karto kalbinti žmonės. Labas, matau, net nešiojate kaukės, tai norėtumėm į savo kompaniją priimti. Labai greita atranka gaunasi. Bet va, žiūrėkite, čia, kiek aš suprantu, mes plaukiosim. Čia vadinasi tokia kaip architektūrinė, ne? Čia gaunas tokia... Visiškai teisingai. Va. Sūnau, tu gerai pataikė. Apie nekilnojamo turtą pasakos.
Ir ką tu gerai parodai?
Tai aš kiek suprantu pasakos apie tos pastatus.
Pažiūrėk, tai ką mums geria.
Čia smetoniška gira, nusipirkom lietuvių parduotuviai.
Old Vilnius.
Jo, Old Vilnius vadinasi parduotuvė. Čikagą, čia gal netgi lietuvių yra, aš taip galvoju. Ar gali būti lietuvių tam laive? Gal ir ne. Gal ir taip. Kas kalbate lietuviškai, ponai ir ponios? Prašome, atsiliepkite. Vakar, jeigu kas žiūrėjot vakarykštį mūsų laivą, tai Monika sutiko savo klientę sesę, bet ten ir ta sesė tvarkė reikalus, tai Monika labai nustebo, kad, žodžiu, galima kitam pasaulio gale sutikti savo klientą. Čia turbūt pirma tokia patirtis. Man tai tokių bairių yra jau labai daug buvę. Nu, Monika ir nedirbo 27 metus. Nu va, žodžiu, pažiūrėsime, kaip ta Čikaga atrodo. Reikėtų nuotrauką biškį pasidaryti mums iš čia, ką? Aš čia visiems laivų pridarysiu, o savo po to be nuotraukų paliksiu. Amerikos vėliavos, Lietuvos vėliavos nėra, o turėtų būti. O tokie tiltai yra, jeigu kiek suprantu, dviaukščiai tiltai, bent jau šitas dviaukštis, kaip kiti, turbūt irgi panašiai. Mūsų akeriukas deginasi ant laivo.
Palauk, pabėlėk, ir atsisuki mane. Va, išlindo ta moteris.
Nu tai va tiek, paplatinkit, turėtumėm pradėti važiuoti. Sveiki visi. Turėtumėm pradėti važiuoti už kiek laiko?
Už 5 minučių.
Už 5 minučių turėtumėm išplaukti, tai dabar galim pasišnekėti.
Čia žalias vanduo, netgi.
Žalias...
Prie manęs glaudėsi, kažką nori paklausti.
Monika, ką jūs manote apie Čikagą?
Čikago.
Lyginant su Miamiu.
Miamis geriausia.
Miamis geriausia. Tai ko atvažiavot čia, jeigu čia jums nepatinka Čikaga, tai ko jūs čia atvažiavot?
Nu, noriu susipažinti su architektūra. Nekilnojamo turto.
Su nekilnojamo turto su Trumpo architektūra jinai nori susipažinti. Matot, tokia jinai.
Sako, visi iš Čikagos lietuviai varo į Floridą, tai čia turbūt kainos krenta.
Mes atvažiavam pažiūrėti, ko tie lietuviai...
Aš tai važiavau visą kelionę, kad tik visos daugą, tai vadžiausia kristalkas.
Akeras visą kelionę šitą važiavo, kad sutikti savo draugą Mičigane, kur vakar dar pas jos buvom, užvakar buvom, porą dienų buvom pas jos. Nu ir dabar Čikago, po to žiūrėsim dar kažkur važiuosim.
Kristalukas.
Ai, ne kažkur, o kristalukas. Taip keista Čikagoje matyti tokią valtelę, ne? Žiūrėkit, persuksi. Floridai pas mumis tokių pilna, nes, nu, taip ir turėtų būti. Bet čia, vat, pamatai tokį ir atrodo kažkaip nesiderina tarp tų dangoraižių. Kažkaip tai, ir jų čia turėtų ežere būti daug, aš manau, tokių, bet, nu, kažkaip man va, tokios jachtos asocijuojasi su Baltis, jachtos asocijuojasi su Miami. Kaip ten nufotografuos?
Čia atsistok.
Su laivu?
Tai kažkur tą pakraus.
Kur nesugasiau?
Apkai.
Nufotografavai. O. Monika sakė, vanduo žalias, tai parodysiu. Varikliai jau veikia, brangiai, mes jau pasiruošę plaukti. O kodėl tas vanduo žalias, tai nežinau. Gal dapila jo čia kažko, arba iš ežero, gal toks įplaukė. Okay.
Čia ir vadinasi Čikago River.
Čikago River?
Bent jau taip ant GPS rašo.
Okay.
Tai turėtumėm visas šitas 3 atšakas išnagrinėti.
Kokias atšakas?
Šičia.
Parodyk, išaiškink. Žiūrėkit, kas čia bus. Monika aiškina, ką mes turėtume pamatyti.
Taip, esame čia, tai visas šitas 3 atšakas turėsim išnagrinėti. Ir šičia. Tiek supratau.
Tai čia yra, žodžiu, dabar mes į 3 valandų kelionę, ne?
Ne.
Atsiprašau.
90 minučių.
90 minučių, 1,5 valandos kelionę.
Čia yra Čikagos ežeras.
Yra kelių 45 minučių.
Yra 45, bet čia nebuvo 45.
Ir 90 minučių. Reiškiasi, kainuoja kiek?
O čia 40.
40 suaugusim ir 20 vaikui, ne?
Jo, 18.
Nu, žodžiu, mums $300. 1,5 valandos va toks pasiplaukimas. Nu ir va tokia, kiek suprantu, informacinė, architektūrinė pamokėlė apie tos Čikagos.
Hello everyone, welcome aboard Linnea. I am Captain Josh. If I could have your attention for just a few minutes, please. I have an important safety announcement. This vessel is licensed and inspected annually by the U.S. Coast Guard and is fitted with all required safety equipment. Life rings are located on either side of the pilot house and forward and aft on the main deck. Life preservers are labeled in storage lockers in the aft section of the vessel on the main deck and under some of the aft seats on the upper deck. Please do not tamper with them as they are for emergency use only. In the unlikely event of an emergency, a uniformed crew member will distribute and assist in the donning of life preservers. Instructions for their use are located inside the lockers and seat boxes. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the U.S. Coast Guard, require that masks or face coverings to be worn by all persons while on board the vessel. Please do not stand on the seats or sit on the seat backs or railings. Feel free to move about the vessel. However, please use caution. Please walk. Do not run on board. Emergency exits are located on both decks on either side of the vessel. There are stairs both forward and aft. Please use extra caution on the stairs, use the handrails, and do not congregate on them. Your crew today is Devin, David. We have our bartender, Gary. Feel free to reach out to them if you need assistance or have questions. Your tour guide today is Alyssa. Thank you for your consideration.
Alyssa stebuklų šalyje. Nu va, vieno žodžio, man atrodo, mes jau judam.
All right. A few more business type things and we can get to the fun of it. Pretend that this entire area is stanchioned off. It's called the tour guide zone. Unless you are an employee of Wendella Boat Company, please refrain from entering the tour guide zone. The truth of the matter is, this is closer than I like to get to people that I don't know in the best of circumstances. Also, yes, it's true though. Also, sometimes people are more interested in just being on a boat than they are about learning about Chicago's history and architecture. And that's great. I've been that person. Probably will be again. We just ask that if you want to have any conversation, be it in person or on the phone, if you could go downstairs. I recommend the bow of the boat. You get the great views, and there's some chairs down there, and then your conversation won't get in the way of anybody's entertainment and education. I just made that up. trademark. Okay, and then for those of you joining us, there is a bar downstairs as well as the heads, and strategically located throughout the vessel are garbage cans. If you go to the bar, please make sure you throw away your garbage. And this is a non-smoking vessel, and that does include vapes and e-cigarettes. It will set off the fire alarms, and you could be embarrassed. So with that, I am going to get going because I got a lot to cover. I'm going to talk for about 75 of the next 90 minutes. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. Chicago is considered to be one of the top 10 most beautiful skylines in the world. I am biased. I think it's the most beautiful. But it is inarguably one of the top 10. And that was made possible by a tragedy. On October 8, 1871, the city of Chicago caught on fire. At the time of the Great Chicago Fire, the population of Chicago was 300,000. And during the almost 2 days of the fire, 1/3 of the city burned to the ground. So what that means is that 17,000 homes and businesses were destroyed, leaving 100,000 people homeless, and 250 people died, which is a tragedy by any stretch of the imagination. But it was also an opportunity, because it gave us a second chance to build a second city. And that's why we're called the second city. Not because we're second to New York, as they would have you believe, but because we literally built a second city on the ashes and debris of the first city. A little bit more history. If you go across that bridge, that's the approximate location of Fort Dearborn. In 1803, the federal government built as a fort. In 1812, it was destroyed in a fire during the War of
Čikagą buvo sudegusi ir jie
And then at street level, you've got the London Guarantee and Accident Building, completed in 1923. The architect is Alfred Altschuler, and it's in a style that's known as Beaux-Arts. So it's got a decorative base, stack of floors, decorative top. It's now the home to the London House Hotel, which is a boutique hotel that got its name from a jazz club that used to be in there called the London House. You got on the boat at the base of the Wrigley Building, which is also in that Beaux-Arts style, completed in the 1920s. Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White are the architects, and it's got that decorative base, stack of floors, decorative top. It's got 6 different shades of glazed white terracotta, starting off with the darkest at the bottom, working its way up to the lightest at the top, which some people say was inspired by Sticks at Chewing Gum, because it was home to Wrigley Chewing Gum Company. They actually sold the building several years ago, and then it was purchased in the summer of 2018 by a local billionaire for $255 million. Chump change. It was the first office building in the city of Chicago to have air conditioning. So we're going to go down the main branch of the Chicago River, the north branch, the south branch, the turning basin by Lake Michigan, and then back to the dock. Most of the tour is going to take place on the right-hand side in the direction of travel. I will let you know when that is not the case. Trump International Hotel and Tower, completed in 2009. It is the second tallest building in the city of Chicago, third tallest in the United States of America. It is 1,362 feet tall with the spire. The architects are Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. The lead architect is Adrian Smith. Adrian Smith is also the lead architect of the tallest building in the world, which is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. If you want a sense of how tall the tallest building in the world is, look up to the top of Trump and double that. Now, under construction in Saudi Arabia is what's going to be the new tallest building in the world, also designed by Adrian Smith. We don't know the exact height, but according to Adrian Smith himself, it is approximately triple the height of Trump International Hotel and Tower. So pretty tall. Next to that, we've got the American Medical Association building. It's architecturally significant insofar as it was Mies van der Rohe's final building. He actually died in '69. This was completed in '71. Mies van der Rohe is an internationally acclaimed architect who moved here from Germany in the 1930s to teach architecture at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And he brought with him what's known as the International Style of Architecture. The International Style of Architecture is defined by rejecting all non-essential ornamentation. Mies's philosophy was less is more. Now here's a couple fun facts about this building. Adrian Smith thought that this was Mies's best building, so he designed the facade on Trump International Hotel and Tower to complement the facade on the AMA. Also, the building was renovated in 2013, and the architect who oversaw the renovation is a guy named Dirk Lohan, who happens to be Mies van der Rohe's grandson. Now, because Mies moved here to teach architecture, you're going to see a lot of his influence, a lot of international style buildings. Ironically, Bertrand Goldberg, architect of the Marina City Towers, we call them the Corncob buildings. Goldberg was a student of van der Rohe's. He rejected the international style. His philosophy was there are no right angles in nature, so there shouldn't be any right angles in architecture. A lot of people are very curious as to how these buildings are constructed. Think of a flower. The elevator is the stem, and each condo is a pie-shaped petal. And they really are pie-shaped. The narrowest part is where you enter the unit, the widest part is the balcony. One piece of pie is a studio, 1.5 pieces of pie is a 1-bedroom, and 2 pieces of pie is a 2-bedroom. They completed Marina City Towers in 1967. In the 1960s, people were moving from the city to the suburbs. So the janitors union had an idea for a city within a city. So when Marina City Towers was first completed, it had a movie theater, a grocery store, a dry cleaner, a restaurant, a bowling alley, and a skating rink. They unfortunately had to close the skating rink a few years ago when somebody accidentally skated over the edge. I'm kidding, that didn't really happen. There was a skating rink, I just don't know why it closed. Now I can see how dark the humor is, and if everyone's paying attention. So that does a lot. This red brick masonry construction building is the Reed Murdoch Center, which is a converted warehouse, but I'm gonna just tell you more because the bridges are open. We're being enveloped by sailboats. We only open our bridges on Wednesdays and Saturdays in the spring and in the fall. So if your boat can't make it under the bridge, you have to go at a scheduled time to get under the bridges. So and it's apparently an all-day process, but that's what's happening right now. They're headed out to Lake Michigan where they're gonna live for the rest of the summer. Not actually live, the boats are, it's a new thing for me. This blue-green glass right here, this is 300 North LaSalle, completed in 2009. The architects are Picard and Chilton, and it is a LEED certified platinum. So LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Platinum is the highest designation you can get. Lots of different features that make this building worthy of a platinum designation. It has a rooftop garden to mitigate rainfall, and it uses river water for its cooling system. So it takes the river water in, uses it to cool down the air conditioner, and then spits it out a degree or two warmer. It's one of about a dozen buildings on the river that do that. And then this is the Merchandise Mart of Chicago, completed in 1931. The architects are Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. And it's Art Deco. Art Deco is defined by having limestone facade, strong vertical lines that draw your eye up, setbacks, and geometric ornamentation. It's also the second largest building in the United States of America. Number 1 is the Pentagon. It has 8 miles of hallway. Now, it was originally built by Marshall Field so it could consolidate his warehouses. However, in 1945, he had to sell it due to back taxes. The Kennedy family purchased it for $13 million. In 1998, the Kennedy family sold it for $575 million. That's what you call a really good return on your investment. I'm glad it worked out for them. They did not sell the piece of property next to the Merchandise Mart. So this was a parking lot. They didn't think it would ever have much value. So they were going to just throw it on the deal in 98. And the facilities manager encouraged them to hold on to it. And as you can see, they're developing it. It's a development called Wolf Point. They've already completed Wolf Point West and East. They are high-end luxury apartments. And then under construction is Wolf Point South, which is now called Salesforce Tower. It's going to be commercial, with the principal tenant being Salesforce, which is kind of odd because they're not really returning to work, but that's okay. Now, Wolf Point's an important area in Chicago's history. One of our first homesteads was here. Early 1800s, 66 people lived in Wolf Point. But they had a general store, they had a church, they had a post office, and they had 3 taverns, which is about on point for Chicago's tavern to population ratio. It was in one of those taverns where Chicago got its name. Trying to figure out what to call this area, they decided to call it their version of what the Native Americans called it. Native Americans called this area Chicagwa, which means stinky onion, which is what was growing along the banks of the Chicago River. Now we're turning down the North Branch. This is the only part of the tour we're going to bounce between banks of the river. I'll let you know in the direction of travel what side to be looking on. We're going to start with the first 3 buildings on the left side. This white building is called the Residences of River Bend. It was completed in the early 2000s. DiStefano and Partners are the architects, and it's in a style that we call contextualism. That's when the building's footprint pays homage to the topography of the land. So we've got a bend in the river, we've got a bend in the building. And when they built this, they put all the hallways, all the mechanicals on the west side of the building. So each and every unit faces east. So each and every person that lives there can enjoy a really great view of. That wasn't there. They had a great view of the main branch of the Chicago River. Next to that, we've got Fulton House, which is originally a cold storage facility. I want you to imagine a windowless red brick box. The walls were stuffed with cork and horsehair to keep the meat from the Union stockyards cold. In the 1980s, they renovated it. Harry Weiss is the architect who oversaw the renovation. And see those starfish that work their way up to porthole windows? Weiss is known for including nautical touches on his work. 2019, I read that the penthouse was on the market. It was listed at $7.9 million. Next to that, we've got the Chicago River Cottages, also designed by Harry Weiss, completed in the 1980s. In addition to nautical touches, Weiss is known for triangles. And I feel like this is a very good marriage of those two motifs, said to be evocative of sailboats. It's 4 townhomes, and until a few years ago, it had all 4 original owners. One of the owners sold, and I don't know how much it went for, but I'm going to go with the technical term, a lot. On the right-hand side, there's Blue and Taupe building. It's called the East Bank Club. It's a high-end fitness facility, or as we like to say, where the jet set go to sweat. We don't know their current members, but former members include Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, and Michael Jordan. Now, it was completed in '79, and in the 1970s, the river was still beyond disgusting. So much so that they did not include windows facing the river. That was added post-construction. But the river is coming along. And to give you a sense of how much, on the left-hand side, we've got Kinsey Park. These are European-inspired row houses. Papa George and Hames are the architects. And every single unit sold based on spec before they ever broke ground. It's a gated community. And if you look at eye level, you can see there's a river walk. And sometimes people ask if they can walk on the river walk at Kinsey Park. Because in Chicago, we have a huge commitment that everybody has access to the water, which I'll elaborate on in a moment. But specific to Kinsey Park, the answer is yes, however. Only during the day. You gotta check in with security. And in a gated community, it is not called a river walk. It is not called a sidewalk. It is called a promenade. On the right-hand side, we've got the Riverbank Lofts. George Nimmons, who did the Reed Murdoch Center, was the original architect. And these are an excellent example of what you call adaptive reuse. So that's where you take a building that's got one function. In this case, it was a printing facility. And you turn it into something else. In this case, soft lofts. You can always tell an adaptive reuse building by the balconies. When the balconies have been look like that, added on after the fact, you know you're looking at an adaptive reuse building. Now, this whole neighborhood's called the River North. And the River North has become increasingly popular with parents of tiny people. I guess you call them young children. So they added Montgomery Ward Park up here. It's 4 acres. And in addition to a playground, it also has a dog park. And I found out it used to just be a parking lot where all the buses from the downtown theaters for bus groups used to park. So we now have 2 white aluminum residential high-rises that are coming into view. They look like they're not quite finished. Kingsbury on the Park and Erie on the Park, completed in 2004. The architect is Lucian Lagrange, and they are a rare example of residential European exposed steel skeletal framing. That is a mouthful and a tongue twister. What does it mean? It means the guts of the building are on the outside of the building. So see those upside down V's? Those are called chevrons. And they are not ornamentation. They are actually supporting the building. Then we've got the blue glass building with the white concrete corners. That's the Montgomery, completed in 1971. Minoru Yamasaki is the architect. And that was one of the world headquarters for Montgomery Ward. Now, there are some people on the boat that might not have any idea what a Montgomery Ward is. So it was the very first mail-order catalog company in the world, thought up by a Chicagoan named Aaron Montgomery Ward. If you're not familiar with mail-order catalog companies, think of it as Amazon in a book. You used to put items into your shopping cart by circling them and earmarking the page. When you were ready to place your order, you picked up a phone. It was connected to a wall and had to be dialed. And then somebody answered on the other line. Now, I recently moved. I wish it was that difficult to order things these days. It's a little too easy for that buy it now button. In addition to Montgomery Ward, we were also the home of Sears and Spiegel. Now, we as Chicago owe Aaron Montgomery Ward, the man, a huge debt of gratitude, because we have in Chicago 26 miles of lakefront property with no commercial development, which is basically unheard of. And it's in part thanks to Aaron Montgomery Ward. In the 1800s, he had an office overlooking Lake Michigan on Michigan Avenue, and people were starting to build on it, which is what they did on the Great Lakes at that time. And he found a very early plan for the city of Chicago, designating that particular parcel of land free and clear for all. So he spent about 20 years suing people, presumably his friends, to prevent them from building on the property. He later said if he had known it was going to take so long, he probably wouldn't have done it, but we are forever grateful that he did, because the property that he sued to save is Grant Park, which is considered to be Chicago's front yard. It's where you can find Buckingham Fountain, Taste of Chicago, Jazz and Blues Fest, and Lollapalooza. I'm certain Lollapalooza was exactly what Aaron Montgomery Ward had in mind when he was paying 20 years of legal bills. They owned a lot of property here along the river. The largest of it, though, is what was his warehouse, a building called the Domain. He chose the location because of its proximity both to the train and the river. It's now the home of Groupon. When it was completed in the 1920s, it was the largest concrete building in the United States of America. And the prairie style of architecture, which we associate with Frank Lloyd Wright, lower to the ground, strong, sweeping horizontal lines. They renovated it in the early 2000s, finding hundreds of pairs of roller skates, the old-timey kind with the key. It was part of your uniform. If you worked in the warehouse at Montgomery Ward, you were expected to roller skate up and down the hallway for quicker order fulfillment. I used to make a joke about how no one would roll with that in 2021. Then I found out there's a warehouse in Spain that has employees roller skate. I don't think it would get a lot of traction here in the United States of America. Oh, thank you. Wait till we get to my Titanic jokes, man. Anyway, we're turning the boat around, and we've talked about every building that we're going to talk about here on the North Branch. That's by design. I have a extended history. Also, it's a good time if you want to go visit Gary at the bar, or need to get out of the get in the climate control. You'll hear me wherever you go. There are even speakers in the bathrooms, which is a little weird, but okay. Like many of you, I had a lot of time on my hands the past year. About September, I ran out of podcasts to listen to, so I started listening to history podcasts about Chicago. Chicago has a very fascinating and somewhat dark history. I could probably talk about the Great Chicago Fire for just an hour, but I gotta like cover the basics. But I can recommend some podcasts if you're interested in going a little deeper in Chicago's history. We were in the 1600s, we had our first European visitors, Marquette and Joliet. They were here on a mission on behalf of a country called New France. We call that geographic area Canada. And they made a recommendation about a portage between the South Branch of the Chicago River and the Des Plaines River, which I'll elaborate on later on in the tour. In the 1700s, we had our first non-native settler, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. We don't know a lot about du Sable. We know he was Haitian, his mother was African, his father was French. And he set up a very successful trading post, which I'll point out to you where it was when we go by it. And then in 1837, we incorporated as the city of Chicago. I want to go back to the Great Chicago Fire now, though, because I talked about the aftermath, but I haven't talked about the cause. So we know one thing. It started in Mrs. O'Leary's barn. Legend has it, Mrs. O'Leary went out to milk her cow. Her cow got a little excited, kicked over a lantern, ended up burning down the entire city of Chicago. This was widely believed, and Mrs. O'Leary was hated and ran out of town. We later found out it was a made-up story by out-of-town journalists so they could sell more papers the next day. And in fact, in 1997, the City Council of Chicago voted to exonerate both Mrs. O'Leary and the cow. So it was a culmination of really bad circumstances. Chicago had been experiencing a drought. We'd gotten about 1.5 inches of rain in 2 months. And in fact, the entire Great Lakes region was experiencing a drought. And there were other notable fires that same day as the Great Chicago Fire about the same time. And in fact, there have been fires all throughout the fall in Chicago, even one earlier in the week. Another problem, Chicago is made out of wood. Like, I'm not just talking our buildings. We had wood streets and wood sidewalks as well. And the firefighters were presumably tired from fighting fires, and they were late to answer the sound of the alarm. So the fire already had a head start. And now the fire gets crazy. It involves 2 fire tornadoes at some point in time. There's a lot more that goes into it. But the fire initially started kind of in the more industrial area of town, which means there are warehouses, including one that had coal, and another one, matches. So yeah, it's hard to imagine, but think of the visual as the West Coast wildfires. And the only thing that was going to put it out was what finally happened. It rained. So we had a healthy paranoia about ever catching on fire again, and have some of the toughest fire codes in the United States of America. 2 years after the Great Chicago Fire, the co-owner and publisher of the Chicago Tribune ran for mayor and won 2 terms on the platform of the Fire Prevention Party, which kind of tickles me. We were determined to rebuild. By the 1880s, we were the fastest growing population on the planet here in Chicago. And then we found out the World Columbian Exposition was coming to the United States of America. It was going to be the first World Fair held on American soil. We really, really wanted to host this fair. So we sent our best politicians to Washington, D.C. And they lobbied their little hearts out. And we ended up getting awarded the fair, which was great for us, but it made New York a little bitter. And one of their journalists referred to our politicians as windy windbags from the Windy City who are full of hot air. And that's why we're called the Windy City. Not because we're the windiest city in America, which we're not, but because our politicians are full of hot air. Now, I find this to be a very unfair assessment. If you know anything about Chicago politics or Illinois politics as a whole, you know that we've always had some of the most honest, above-board people you could ever hope to vote for. Twice. So the fair itself ended up becoming the most important historic event in the history of Chicago. They hired a firm called Burnham and Root to plan the fair. John Root, who was Daniel Burnham's business partner, died before they started working on the fair, so Daniel Burnham planned entirely on his own what's famously known as the White City. It was on the south side in Jackson Park. It was comprised of 250 temporary buildings made out of material a little bit like drywall. Daniel Burnham got so interested in city planning that he went on to be a city planner. And he planned many notable cities, including his hometown of Chicago, which is considered to be one of the best planned cities in the world. If you're enjoying our expansive boulevards, you can thank Daniel Burnham. I listened to a podcast about Daniel Burnham, and his plan of 1909, which we still follow, is really comprehensive and quite visionary, with the exception of one thing. He didn't think cars would be widely popular. So he planned the city based on streets that have both cars and horse and buggy. He died in 1912, and it was harder. He didn't have anybody to really advocate for his plan. So Charles Wacker, who was a local businessman, commissioned a guy named Walter Moody to write a book on the Burnham Plan of 1909, which was a textbook in urban planning for 8th graders. I don't know what difference that made, but it's true. The guy who did who was the landscape architect, was a guy named Frederick Law Olmsted. Olmsted's a bit of a rock star in architect circles. He designed Central Park, Prospect Park, the entire park system of Louisville, Kentucky, and the list goes on and on. Now, fairs were designed to highlight the greatest innovations of the day. So the previous fair had been held in Paris. The centerpiece of the Paris fair was the Eiffel Tower. Burnham and the gang, they wanted to out-Eiffel. So they found their very own structural engineering marvel called the Ferris wheel. That's right, very first Ferris wheel in the world was right here in Chicago. It was over 200 feet tall. Made partially out of wood. It had 60 gondolas that held roughly 100 people each, and it took an hour to get around. Other innovations include juicy fruit gum, Cracker Jack, the zipper, a little thing called electricity, and Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. Initially just called Pabst beer, they entered into a contest at the fair and they received a ribbon. So they renamed it Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, so everyone would know that they were an award-winning beer. If you've ever had PBR, you might be wondering how bad was all the other beer that this is the beer that won. Two things. First of all, it was a participation ribbon. All the beers got ribbons. And second, they'd already been using a silver ribbon in their on their label because they thought it would appeal to lady beer drinkers. It's true. That they thought if they put a ribbon, I know I always can see a ribbon and I'm like, I'm going to get that beer. Same with champagne of beers. That's why it's called the champagne of beers. Because ladies are going to fall for that. Anyway, the fair, I digress. The fair lasted for 6 months. 27 million people came, which is roughly half the population of the United States of America. And it turned a profit, which is a big deal because if you look at like cities that host Olympics, they aren't tending to turn profits. But here in Chicago, we turned a profit. So we decided to do another one in 1933. It was called the Century of Progress, which is held on what's now known as the museum campus, where you can find the Shedd Aquarium, the Adler Planetarium, the Field Museum, Soldier Field, that's where the Chicago Bears play. So if you're afraid of catching coronavirus, go there. They don't catch anything in that stadium. It's all part of Grant Park, also part of Grant Park, but not part of the museum campus is the Art Institute of Chicago. I highly recommend the Art Institute of Chicago. It's one of the best art museums in the world with the largest collection of Impressionist art outside of Paris. And with that, we're turning down the south branch of the Chicago River. We're going to resume looking mostly on the right-hand side. I'll let you know if that's not the case. And we're going to start talking about buildings again. This building with the arch, it's called River Point, completed in 2017. The architects are Picard and Chilton, and it is, as of 2020, LEED certified platinum. But what's more important is that all these buildings we're about to see are built over active train tracks. And building over active train tracks, well, it introduces some interesting structural engineering conundrums. Probably best illustrated by the building 150 North Riverside. You might be looking at it wondering if the architects ever played a game of Jenga. It was completed in 2017. The architects are Getch and Partners. And on one side, you've got the river. On the other side, you've got train tracks. So the most the base of the building could ever be is 40 feet wide. Well, you can't build a very tall building in a tiny little base if you rely solely on traditional structural engineering. But they figured out a way to make it work. See those silver things? Those are called I-beams. And they're made from a steel from Luxembourg. They're the strongest I-beams in the world. And they go deep into bedrock. And on the top of the building is what's known as a mass damper system. So it's 160,000 gallons of water and 4 containers on rollers. And if the computer indicates that the wind is going too hard in one direction, it activates the damper system and sends it in the opposite direction as a counterbalance or a ballast, if you will. Then we have 100 at North Riverside, completed in 1990. Perkins and Will are the architects, but we just call it the Boeing building because it's the world headquarters to Boeing. Here's a fun fact about this building. Boeing owns the building, but they don't own the land. They're on a land lease. So what that means is that every year they pay money to rent the land upon which the building that they own is built, which is wacky and confusing, and it's not even the weirdest thing we're going to hear on this tour today. That's going to come in a couple of buildings down. In the meantime, there is a Boeing store for all your Boeing needs. This bridge is too loud. Okay, this is 2 North Riverside, in the 1920s. It's Art Deco. Halliburton and Root are the architects. It's home to the very first public plaza in Chicago. Also the home to a newspaper called the Chicago Daily News, which went out of business in the 1970s. But one of the things they were known for is giving work and voices to young journalists. And this is the building where young Mike Rako started his career. Famous syndicated Mike Rako. Also, Chicago poet Carl Sandburg, who was also a journalist, worked for the Chicago Daily News. Now, this whole neighborhood's called the West Loop. The West Loop is one of the hottest neighborhoods in Chicago. You'll find some of the best restaurants in the world in the West Loop. 70 years ago, it was Skid Row. All you were going to find in the West Loop then was gin joints, flop houses, and broken dreams. They got turned around when they built a series of 4 buildings called the Gateway Center. This is Gateway 1, completed in 1965. The architects are Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. The lead architect is Bruce Graham. And it's built over the gates for our train station. Which in America, we have a thing called air rights. That means you own the air above your home and above your property, so no one can ever build on top of it without your permission. Through the years, the owners of Union Station have sold their air rights to 6 different entities, and it's been resold many times over. It's to the point where the owners of Union Station can't figure out who owns what, but it is the most American thing you're going to hear in this tour today. People are buying, selling, and renting air. And in the case of Union Station, there's a dispute over who's responsible for maintaining the ceiling. Is it the people who own the air rights, or is it the people who own Union Station? And I can tell you, the ceiling is what's suffering in this dispute. Gateway 2, identical 22-story international style building as Gateway 1, completed in 1967. Skidmore, Owings & Merrill are the architects. Bruce Graham is the lead architect. Then we've got Gateway 3, the white building, completed in the 1970s. Skidmore, Owings & Merrill are the architects. Bruce Graham is the lead architect. It's now called Fifth Third Center. It is made with precast panels, which are concrete panels that are made off-site and then attached to the building. It's also one of the entrances for Union Station. And funny anecdotal story, I was taking the train last summer and I was super early, so I sat out here and watched the boats go by. And there was one other guy sitting out there watching the boats go by. And about 20 minutes in, he just turns to me randomly and says, "Do you think the tour guides ever get tired of saying the same thing all day long?" And I was like, "I'll never tell." Now, I want to draw your attention to this 3-story black attachment with the X bracing on it. That was the home to the Mid-America Commodities Exchange, which was originally a trading floor. So Skidmore, Owings & Merrill are the architects. Bruce Graham is the lead architect. Dr. Fazler Khan is the structural engineer. He is considered the Albert Einstein of structural engineers. So back in the day, they used their hands to buy and sell, which means you can't have any obstructed views. No walls. So see that X bracing on the side? That allows for the entire weight of the building to rest solely on the perimeter of the building. It's a structural engineering marvel that is now a gym and a bagel shop. Gateway 4, the largest of the gateways, completed in the 1980s. Skidmore, Owings & Merrill are the architects. DeStefano is the lead architect. And he got criticism because he didn't put any ornamentation on the building. But his response was that he used concave and convex green glass, and the other buildings were going to be his ornamentation. And you can see how they create that kaleidoscopic effect. Then starting on the other side of the bridge, we've got the former Chicago Main Post Office, which, when it was completed in 1930, it was the largest post office in the United States of America, because we had Sears, Montgomery Ward, and Spiegel. Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White are the architects, and it is Art Deco. They closed it in 1994. In the early 2000s, a British guy by the name of Bill Davies purchased it, and he had really grand plans for the building, but he had to get a $1 billion loan. They couldn't get the loan, so it sat empty for years. And in fact, it was about to go into eminent domain. See this bridge we're gonna go under? It becomes the Eisenhower Expressway, and it goes through the post office. And the city was afraid that pieces of the building were gonna crumble down onto cars. Luckily, that never happened because a company called 601W purchased the property. Now, it's speculated that Bill Davies was an older gentleman who was kind of lonely, and that the reason he held on to the post office for as long as he did was he enjoyed the attention he got from potential buyers. I don't know if it's true. He did die within 48 hours of closing. So 601W has purchased the property. It's now the largest adaptive reuse project in the United States of America. It's commercial. I toured it. I did a hard hat tour in 2019. It's going to be amazing. So the building's landmark, so it still has a lot of the original fixtures. So what they're going for is a golden 20s theme, but with very modern, luxurious updates. The day we toured it, they got the boxing ring, custom-made boxing ring, and it looked like a 1920s boxing ring, but you knew it had 2019 technology. And then I had a passenger last year who updated me on the boxing ring. No one's allowed to use it, but it does get sanitized twice a day. So with that, I'm gonna put the mic down and take a brief pause. And I'll pick the mic up when we get down to Chinatown I'm going to, of course, talk about buildings, but I'm also going to talk about two stories that I've heard that I think are two of the most Chicago things I've ever heard.
Nu ką, brangiai, va taip. Aš nieko nekomentavau ir nekalbėjau, nes jinai turbūt geriau viską žino negu aš.
Bet kitams irgi reikia pertraukos.
Ja, dabar jinai pasidarė pertrauką, tai dar Chinatown kažkokia, ar ne?
Man tai labiausiai strigo, kad buvo šitie keliai grįsti su
medžiu. Aha, buvo keliai medžių. Nu, dangoraižių tai labai daug. Kažkaip aš įsivaizdavau, kad Čikaga turi mažiau dangoraižių.
Kodėl visi tada labai iš visos Amerikos čia važiavo į Čikagą? Kas čia buvo?
Tiesiog labai statėsi turbūt. Čia po to gaisro.
Nes, dėl
Ai, kažkoks, ne, čia kai buvo daug atvažiavę, tai balis buvo kažkoks, tai kažkokia festivalis ar kažkas tai.
Aš galvoju, tiesiog persikėlė gyventi labai daug.
Ai, kai ten daug milijonų atvažiavo. Ne.
Daugiau nei pusė Amerikos.
Tai ten balis kažkoks, tai festivalis ar dar kažkas. Ok. Čia biškutį valtelių va. Tokių tall ship windy. Čia kaip mūsų meridianas Klaipėdoj beveik, ne?
Meridianas gražesnis. Didesnis.
Nu, va tokia kelionė valtelėje. Trunka jinai pusantros valandos. Reklama neblogam pastatą, nebloga dydį. Ai, no. Nu kągi, turbūt gal ir aš užbaigsiu tą laivą, galėsim dar vėliau kažką įjungti, čia dar turbūt dabar atgal.
Tai kodėl plaukia?
Ką? Ne, aš noriu taip ramiai pasėdėti.
Gerai.
Tai va, tai kol kas tiek. Draugai, draugės, sekėjai. Žodžiu, kol kas aš dabar išjungiu. Jeigu kažką tokio įdomaus dar pamatysim, tai vėl įsijungsim. Kol kas tiek. Iki. Čia buvo Darius Oberligas, visi butai. Kas norite dirbti, pridėkite prie Skype'o. Visi butai. Skype'as. 3 žodžiai atskiri. Visi butai. Sekite, platinkite, čia mes teikiam informaciją įvairią. Ir apie skiepus, ir apie koroną, ir apie tas visas aferas vykdamas dabar pasauliniu mastu. Ir keliaujam, rodome ar ne. Žodžiu, aš taip įsivaizduoju, kad keliam bendrą sąmoningumą žmonių, kas nori tai daryti. Aišku, kas nenori, ten jiem nieko nepakels. Ir aišku, kas nori jungtis prie komandos, dirbti, tai žiūrėkit visi butai YouTube kanalą, žiūrėkit lyderių interviu, žiūrėkit klientų atsiliepimus ir neskaitykit šmeižtų, neskaitykite konkurentų arba nesąžiningų klientų atsiliepimų, nes gali jūs išblaškyti. O šiaip reikia logiškai mąstyti. Jeigu 27 metai dirbu su nekilnojamo turto, turbūt kažką gerai darom. Ačiū uždėmesį, iki.